Welcome to Shadows of the Marquise. Shadows of the Marquise is a sanctuary for lovers of intense and dramatic historical romance. Here you'll find narrated stories that explore arranged marriages, forbidden loves, secret passions, and the eternal struggle between duty and heart. With aristocratic settings, complex characters, and raw emotions, each video transports you to a world of luxury, secrets, and redemption, where disdain can turn into desire, and love has the power to change destinies. If you're passionate about Victorian dramas, Regency plots, and immersive narratives worthy of historical novels, this is the place for you. Today we bring you a tale that will pierce your heart and leave you breathless. Imagine a war hero who conquered empires, commanded armies, and never knew fear on any battlefield. Now imagine that same man trembling at the thought of losing the one thing he was promised, the one light in his darkness. This is the story of Duke Adrian Blackwood, the Iron Duke who feared nothing except losing Lady Rosalind Ashford, the Earl's daughter he claimed as his own. But what happens when the woman promised to you sees you as a monster? What happens when duty collides with a heart that refuses to submit? Stay with us until the end, because this love story will challenge everything you thought you knew about surrender, redemption, and the courage it takes to truly love someone. England, 1816. The war against Napoleon had finally ended, and the battlefields that once ran red with blood now lay silent under gray English skies. But for Duke Adrian Blackwood, the silence was worse than the cannons. At 35 years old, he had spent 15 years of his life commanding armies, making impossible decisions, and watching good men die. They called him the Iron Duke, a man carved from steel and shadow, a man who never flinched, never retreated, never showed mercy to his enemies. His reputation preceded him like a cold wind, freezing the smiles of anyone who dared meet his stormy gray eyes. Those eyes had seen things no man should see, horrors that haunted his sleep and hardened his heart until he wondered if anything remained inside his chest except cold, efficient duty. But there was one thing, one single thread of light that had kept him alive through the darkest winters and bloodiest battles. A promise. 12 years ago, before another brutal campaign, he had saved the life of Earl Thomas Ashford, dragging the wounded man from beneath a collapsed wall while enemy fire rained around them. The Earl, delirious with pain and gratitude, had gripped Adrian's hand and said, "Ask anything of me, anything at all, and it shall be yours." Adrian, exhausted and hollow, had only one request. He didn't want land, didn't want gold. He wanted something pure, something untouched by war. "Give me the most precious thing you possess," he had said. And the Earl, thinking of his infant daughter safe at home, had made a promise that would change 3 lives forever. "When my youngest daughter Rosalind reaches 21, she shall be yours." I swear it on my honor, that promise had become Adrian's talisman, his reason to survive when death seemed preferable to another day of carnage. He kept the Earl's letter in a leather pouch over his heart, reading it by campfire light when the screams of dying men became too loud in his memory. Lady Rosalind Ashford. He barely remembered her as a child of 9, a fleeting impression of auburn curls and curious green eyes when he had last visited Ashford Manor before deployment. But in his mind, she had become something mythical, a beacon of innocence in a world drowning in darkness. She represented everything the war hadn't destroyed, everything he had fought to protect. She was his reward, his redemption, his one chance at something resembling a normal life. Now, as his carriage rolled through the gates of Ashford Manor on a crisp April morning, Adrian felt something he hadn't experienced in 15 years. Fear, not the adrenaline rush of battle, but a deep, gnawing terror that made his hands shake beneath his black leather gloves. The manor rose before him, elegant and warm in cream-colored stone, surrounded by gardens bursting with roses in full bloom. It was so different from the cold gray walls of his own Blackwood Castle in Yorkshire. This place breathed life and light, everything his existence lacked. And somewhere inside was the woman who was supposed to be his salvation. Lady Rosalind Ashford stood in the morning room, arranging white roses in a crystal vase, completely unaware that her entire world was about to shatter. At 21, she had blossomed into a beauty that made even the jaded aristocrats of Bath take notice. Her auburn hair, rich as polished mahogany with copper highlights that caught the sunlight, fell in natural curls past her shoulders. Her emerald eyes sparkled with intelligence and a spirit that refused to be dimmed by society's expectations. She wore a dress of pale green muslin that complemented her coloring perfectly, and her delicate hands moved with practiced grace as she trimmed the rose stems. She was humming softly, lost in thoughts of Viscount Edward Hartley. the charming blonde gentleman who had been courting her with poetry and promises. She believed herself falling in love, believed her future would be one of her own choosing. "Rosalind, darling, please come to your father's study." Her sister Margaret's voice carried an unusual tension that made Rosalind look up sharply. Margaret stood in the doorway, her face pale, her hands twisting together in a gesture of distress that was completely unlike her usually composed older sister. "Now, please. Father needs to speak with you. It's important." Rosalind set down the roses, a cold premonition settling in her stomach. She followed Margaret through the familiar halls of her home, past the portraits of ancestors who seemed to watch with judgment, until they reached her father's study. Earl Thomas Ashford sat behind his desk, looking older than his 58 years. His shoulders were hunched, his eyes red-rimmed, and his hands trembled as he gestured for her to sit. Standing by the window, a dark silhouette against the morning light, was a man she didn't recognize. Tall, impossibly tall, with shoulders that seemed to fill the entire window frame. He stood with military rigidity, his back to her, but even in silhouette, he radiated something that made her heart race with instinctive alarm. "Father, what's wrong? You look unwell. Has something happened?" Rosalind moved to her father's side, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder, but he flinched as if burned. That small gesture told her everything she needed to know. Whatever was about to happen, it was terrible. Her father, who had always been her champion, her protector, couldn't even meet her eyes. "Papa, please, you're frightening me." The man at the window turned, and Rosalind felt the breath leave her lungs. He was not handsome in the conventional sense. His face was too hard, too angular, carved from shadows and severity. Jet black hair, cut military short with premature gray threading the temples. But his eyes, God, his eyes were what stopped her heart. Stormy gray, almost silver in the morning light, and so intense they seemed to see straight through her skin to the terror rising in her chest. A thin scar cut through his right eyebrow. Another marred his strong jaw. He was dressed entirely in black, from his perfectly tailored coat to his leather gloves, like death himself had come calling. And when he looked at her, something flickered in those cold eyes. Recognition, hunger, possession. "Lady Rosalind," his voice was deep, controlled, with the clipped precision of a military commander. "You have grown." It wasn't a compliment. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the same tone he might use to report casualty numbers. He didn't smile, didn't soften. He simply studied her as one might study a battle map, calculating, assessing. "I am Duke Adrian Blackwood. I believe your father has something to tell you." Earl Ashford finally raised his eyes to his daughter, and Rosalind saw something there that made her want to run. Shame. Deep, crushing shame. "My darling girl, 12 years ago, during the war, the Duke saved my life. I made him a promise, a sacred vow. I promised him ... His voice broke, and he had to swallow hard before continuing. "I promised him your hand in marriage when you reached 21 years of age. That time has come. The banns have been read. The wedding will take place in 1 month." The room tilted. Rosalind gripped the edge of the desk, her knuckles white, her breath coming in short gasps. "What? No, you couldn't have. Not without telling me. Not without ... She looked wildly between her father and the dark figure that represented the death of all her dreams. "I won't. I refuse. You cannot force me to marry a stranger. A monster?" Adrian supplied the word she was too frightened to say, his voice soft but sharp as a blade. "Yes, Lady Rosalind, that is what they call me. It's the Iron Duke, the Butcher of Bathahoth. I've earned my reputation in blood and steel. Your father made me a promise, and I've come to collect what is mine. You should know that I am not a man who breaks oaths, nor am I a man who accepts refusal. In 1 month you will become the Duchess of Blackwood. What you feel about it is, I'm afraid, irrelevant." "Irrelevant?" Rosalind's voice rose, trembling with fury and fear. Her green eyes blazed as she stepped toward him, this mountain of a man who spoke of her life as if it meant nothing. "My feelings are irrelevant? I am not property to be traded like a horse or a plot of land. I'm a person with hopes and dreams and someone I ... She stopped, realizing too late what she had almost revealed. Adrian's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Someone you what, Lady Rosalind? Some foppish viscount who reads you poetry and makes promises he has no power to keep?" He took a step toward her, and she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. Close, he was overwhelming, radiating controlled power and something darker, something wounded. "Let me be very clear. You were promised to me. Your father gave his word, and in the world I come from, words and honor are all that separate men from beasts. I spent 15 years in hell watching men die, making choices that haunt my sleep, and the only thing that kept me sane was the promise of you. You are mine, Lady Rosalind, and in 1 month the entire world will know it." Tears streamed down Rosalind's face as she turned to her father. "How could you? How could you sell me to him without even telling me? Does my happiness mean nothing? Does my life mean nothing?" But even as she spoke, she saw the truth in her father's broken expression. Desperation. Debt. She had noticed the subtle signs over the past year, the servants they had let go, the expensive items quietly sold, the worried conversations that stopped when she entered a room. "What did you do, Papa? What debts have you incurred that could cost me my entire future?" Earl Ashford couldn't answer. He simply buried his face in his hands, shoulders shaking. It was Adrian who spoke, his voice somehow gentler despite the iron in his words. "Your father's debts are considerable. Without intervention, Ashford Manor would be seized within the year. Your family would face ruin, scandal, destitution. I have paid those debts in full. Your father and sister will want for nothing. That is my wedding gift to you, Lady Rosalind. The security of everyone you love. All I ask in return is what was already promised. You." Rosalind looked between the two men who had decided her fate without her consent, her father, weak and ashamed, who had sold her to save himself, and this dark stranger, this war-hardened duke who spoke of owning her as calmly as one might discuss the weather. She felt the walls of her freedom closing in, felt the life she had imagined dissolving like morning mist. Edward's handsome face flashed through her mind, his easy smile, his gentle touches. That future was gone now, replaced by a nightmare of cold gray eyes and iron control. "I will never love you," she said clearly, meeting Adrian's gaze with all the defiance she could muster despite the tears still flowing. "You can force me to marry you. You can drag me to your castle in chains if you must, but you will never have my heart. I will be your wife in name only. I swear it." She stripped the emerald ring from her finger, the one Edward had given her in secret, and hurled it at Adrian's feet. "Keep your blood money, Duke. Buy my presents. But know that you will spend the rest of your life married to a woman who despises you." Something flickered in Adrian's eyes then. Something that might have been pain, but it was gone so quickly Rosalind wondered if she'd imagined it. He bent slowly, picked up the ring, and studied it in the light. Then he looked at her, really looked at her, and for just a moment she saw beneath the iron facade to the man underneath. A man in pain. A man who had hoped for redemption and found only more rejection. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, meant only for her. "I know what I am, Lady Rosalind. I know I am scarred and broken, and everything a gentlewoman like you should fear. But I saved your father's life, and he promised me something precious in return. I will not apologize for claiming what is mine. In 1 month, we will marry. What happens after that is entirely up to you." He placed the emerald ring on her father's desk, a silent declaration that her past was over, then turned toward the door. He paused at the threshold, his broad back to them all, and added without looking back, "I will call again next week. I suggest you use this time to make peace with your decision, Lady Rosalind. Because, ready or not, willing or not, you will become mine." Then he was gone, leaving only the faint scent of leather and gunpowder, and the echo of words that sounded like both a threat and a plea. Rosalind collapsed into a chair, her entire body shaking. Margaret rushed to her side, wrapping her in a fierce embrace, but there was no comfort to be found. The life she had known was over. In 1 month she would belong to the Iron Duke, the war hero everyone feared and no one loved. She would leave behind the sunlit halls of Ashford Manor for the dark towers of Blackwood Castle. She would trade poetry and roses for duty and cold efficiency. And somewhere in the depths of her terror, a small, traitorous part of her whispered that those gray eyes held more than cruelty. They held something that looked almost like desperate hope. The month that followed passed both too quickly and agonizingly slow. True to his word, Duke Adrian Blackwood called on Rosalind every week, bringing gifts she refused to open and speaking words she barely heard. Viscount Edward, upon learning of the engagement, had mysteriously vanished to London, taking with him any illusions Rosalind had about his devotion. Margaret tried to comfort her, sharing stories of her own arranged marriage that had grown into love. But Rosalind couldn't hear hope through the thunder of her anger and fear. The wedding approached like an execution date, and she spent her final nights at Ashford Manor crying into her pillow, mourning the death of the future she had imagined. The wedding itself was a cold, formal affair in the stone chapel of Blackwood Castle. Rosalind wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her slender frame, the white lace and silk feeling more like a burial shroud than a bridal gown. She walked down the aisle on her father's trembling arm, past the severe ancestral portraits that seemed to judge her weakness, toward the man who waited at the altar like a dark sentinel. Adrian stood rigid in black and silver, his face an unreadable mask. But when she finally stood beside him and dared to glance up, she saw his hands were shaking. The Iron Duke, the man who had never shown fear on any battlefield, was trembling as he reached for her hand. His touch, even through the gloves they both wore, sent an electric shock through her system. His hand completely engulfed hers, strong and sure despite the tremor she had witnessed. The vicar's words washed over her like a foreign language, meaningless sounds that bound her to this stranger forever. When Adrian was told to kiss his bride, he hesitated, searching her face as if asking permission. Finding only terror and resignation, he placed the briefest, gentlest kiss on her forehead, a touch so at odds with his fearsome reputation that Rosalind felt momentarily disoriented. Then it was done. She was the Duchess of Blackwood, bound to a man she didn't know and couldn't love, trapped in a castle that felt more like a prison than a home. The wedding breakfast was torture, forcing smiles for guests who looked at her with pity and at Adrian with fear. Finally, mercifully, it ended. Rosalind stood in the great hall of Blackwood Castle, watching her father and sister depart in their carriage, taking with them the last remnants of her old life. She was alone now, truly alone, in this vast stone fortress with a husband who terrified her. As the carriage disappeared beyond the gates, she felt Adrian's presence behind her. Close but not touching, his breath stirring the elaborate curls of her hair. "Would you like to see your rooms?" His voice was carefully neutral, offering her an escape from his presence. "I've had the Duchess's chambers prepared. They haven't been occupied since my mother's death 20 years ago. I hope you will find them adequate." He gestured toward the sweeping stone staircase, and Rosalind had no choice but to follow him through the shadowed halls of her new home. The Duchess's chambers were a revelation. Unlike the austere masculine severity of the rest of the castle, these rooms had been transformed. The walls were painted a soft cream, the heavy curtains replaced with lighter fabric and shades of green and gold. A fire blazed in the massive hearth, casting warm light over furniture that looked antique but comfortable. Fresh roses, white and cream, filled vases on every surface, their perfume sweetening the air. Books lined one wall, volumes of poetry and novels she recognized from her own collection at Ashford Manor. Someone had tried very hard to make this cold castle feel like a home. "I had your belongings brought from Ashford Manor," Adrian explained, standing awkwardly in the doorway as if uncertain whether he was allowed to enter. "The books, the roses. Margaret helped me understand what you might need to feel comfortable. There's a connecting door to my chambers, but I swear to you on my honor it will remain locked unless you open it from your side." He pulled a key from his pocket and placed it on the mantelpiece, within her reach but not his. "I know you fear me, Lady Rosalind. I know you see me as the monster everyone else sees. But I want you to understand something." He moved closer, and she had to force herself not to retreat, to hold her ground as he towered over her, his gray eyes intense with something that looked almost like anguish. "I have killed men. I have made terrible choices in war. I've done things that will haunt me until my last breath. But I've never forced myself on a woman, and I will not start with my own wife. These rooms are yours, your sanctuary. You may lock me out, refuse to see me, live your own life within these walls. I will not demand what you will not freely give." Rosalind stared at him, confusion warring with suspicion. This wasn't the tyrant she had expected, the brute who would claim his marital rights without care for her feelings. This was a man trying, in his awkward, damaged way, to give her some measure of control in a situation where she had none. "Then why?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "Why force me to marry you if you don't intend to? To be a husband. Why trap me here if you're going to leave me alone? What do you want from me?" Adrian was silent for a long moment, his jaw clenched as if fighting some internal battle. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw, stripped of its military precision. "I want what every man wants and no soldier deserves. I want peace. I want to sleep without nightmares of the men I've killed. I want to walk through my home and feel something other than emptiness. I want—" He stopped, turning away from her as if ashamed of his own vulnerability. "I want to believe that there's still something good in this world. Something worth all the blood and death. You represented that hope, Lady Rosalind. The promise of you kept me alive when I had every reason to die. I thought perhaps if I could protect you, provide for you, be patient and gentle despite my nature, perhaps you might someday look at me without terror. Perhaps I might earn what I cannot command." Rosalind felt her anger waver, just slightly, as she glimpsed the wounded man beneath the iron exterior. He wasn't the heartless monster she had imagined. He was something more complicated, more tragic. A man destroyed by war, grasping for redemption he didn't know how to earn. But her hurt was too fresh, her loss too raw, to feel sympathy for her captor. "You took everything from me," she said quietly. "My choices, my future, my freedom. You may not force me to your bed, Duke, but you've imprisoned me here just the same." Noble words about patience and gentleness don't change the fact that I am here against my will, bound to a man I don't know and didn't choose. If you truly wanted me to look at you without terror, you should have asked instead of claimed. Adrian flinched as if she had struck him, and the pain in his eyes was so acute that Rosalind almost regretted her words. Almost. He nodded slowly, accepting the hit, then moved toward the door. "You're right, of course. I am a soldier, not a diplomat. I know only how to take what I want, not how to court or woo or convince. But know this, Duchess. I will spend every day trying to earn what I have stolen. And if I fail, if you can never forgive me, then I will at least ensure that you want for nothing. Except, perhaps, for freedom." He paused at the threshold, his broad back to her, silhouetted against the torchlight from the corridor. "Dinner is at 8, but you need not attend if you prefer solitude. I will understand." Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him, leaving Rosalind alone in her gilded cage with more questions than answers. That first night at Blackwood Castle, Rosalind cried herself to sleep in her luxurious new bed, surrounded by roses and books that felt like apologies instead of comforts. But as she drifted into restless dreams, she couldn't stop replaying Adrian's words. The raw pain in his voice when he spoke of peace and nightmares and hope. The monster she had expected would have been easier to hate. This complicated, wounded man who tried so hard to be gentle despite his violent nature was something far more dangerous. Because despite everything, despite her anger and fear and grief for her lost future, a small part of her wondered what secrets those gray eyes held, what scars he hid beneath his black gloves, and whether a man so afraid of losing her might actually be capable of something that looked almost like love. The days that followed established a strange, tense rhythm in Blackwood Castle. Rosalind kept to her rooms mostly, reading by firelight and writing long letters to Margaret that detailed her isolation. True to his word, Adrian never tried to enter her chambers, never demanded her presence at meals or in his bed. But she became aware of him nonetheless in the small, almost invisible ways he tried to reach her. Fresh roses appeared in her rooms every morning, always the cream and white ones she preferred. The library, when she finally ventured into it, had been reorganized with her favorite novels at eye level, easy to reach. The kitchens somehow knew exactly how she took her tea and what foods she liked best. And in the evenings, when she thought no one was watching, she would see him walking the castle grounds alone, his shoulders bowed under invisible weight, looking less like a fearsome duke and more like a man carrying the world's loneliness on his back. It was Margaret who finally broke through Rosalind's wall of resentment. Her sister visited after 2 weeks, finding Rosalind in the Duchess's chambers, pale and listless despite all the luxuries surrounding her. Margaret took one look at her and sighed deeply, settling into the chair by the fire with the no-nonsense attitude of an older sister who had seen enough drama. "Rosalind, darling, I love you, but this has to stop. You're withering away in here like a flower denied sunlight, and meanwhile that poor man is walking around his own castle like a ghost, terrified to even speak to you." "Poor man." Rosalind's voice was sharp with disbelief. "He forced me to marry him, Margaret. He took away every choice I had. Why should I care if he's uncomfortable in his own home?" But even as she spoke, she felt a twinge of guilt. She had seen Adrian's haunted expression, had noticed how carefully he avoided crossing her path, how he flinched whenever she looked at him with fear. Margaret leaned forward, her expression serious. "Because, dearest, I have seen how you look at each other when you think no one is watching. He looks at you like you're the only light in his darkness, and you look at him with something that isn't entirely hate. I'm not saying you should forgive him immediately or pretend to be a happy bride, but perhaps, just perhaps, you could stop hiding in here and actually try to know the man you married. You might be surprised by what you discover." "What if I don't want to know him?" Rosalind whispered, but her words lacked conviction. Because the truth was, she was desperately curious about the man behind the iron facade. She wanted to know what nightmares made him cry out in his sleep, why he wore gloves constantly, what had transformed a young nobleman into the feared war hero everyone whispered about. What if knowing him makes it harder to hate him? What if I can never escape if I stop fighting? "Oh, my darling girl," Margaret pulled her sister into a tight embrace. "You're not trapped in a dungeon with a beast. You're living in a castle with a damaged man who is trying, however clumsily, to give you space to breathe. At least give him a chance to show you who he really is. Meet him halfway. Have dinner with him. Talk to him. You might find that your prison is only as locked as you make it." She pulled back, wiping tears from Rosalind's cheeks. "And for what it's worth, I've watched him when he thinks no one is looking. The way he stares at your door as if afraid to knock. The way he questions the servants about whether you've eaten, whether you seem happy. The way his hands shake when your name is mentioned. That is not the behavior of a tyrant, Rosalind. That is the behavior of a man terrified of losing something precious that evening." For the first time since her wedding, Rosalind did not take dinner in her rooms. She dressed carefully in a gown of deep emerald that made her auburn hair glow like fire, and she descended the stone staircase to the dining hall with her heart pounding so hard she thought it might escape her chest. Adrian was already there, standing by the massive fireplace, staring into the flames with an expression of such profound sadness that Rosalind almost turned back. But he sensed her presence and turned, and the transformation on his face was stunning. Hope, raw and desperate, fluttered his features before he could lock it away behind his usual control. "Lady Rosalind," he breathed her name like a prayer. "You came. Thank you." He moved to pull out her chair, his movements careful and precise, as if afraid any sudden gesture might send her fleeing. They sat at opposite ends of the long table, an expanse of polished wood between them that felt like miles. The servants brought course after course of beautifully prepared food, but neither of them ate much. They were too busy stealing glances at each other, too nervous to do more than push food around their plates. Finally, Adrian cleared his throat, breaking the heavy silence. "How are you finding your rooms? Is there anything you need? Anything at all that would make you more comfortable here?" His voice was so carefully controlled, so desperate to please, that Rosalind felt something crack in her chest. "The rooms are beautiful," she admitted quietly. "Someone went to great effort to make them welcoming." "Was that you?" She finally looked directly at him, really looked, and saw the exhaustion etched into his features, the shadows under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. Adrian's lips quirked in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "Margaret helped, but yes. I wanted you to have a refuge, something that felt like home. I know Blackwood Castle is cold and dark, nothing like Ashford Manor. I know I am cold and dark as well, but I hoped." He trailed off as if uncertain how to finish the sentence. "You hoped what?" Rosalind found herself leaning forward, despite her intentions to remain distant. There was something magnetic about him when he let his guard down, something wounded and real that called to her despite every reason to resist. "I hoped that if I gave you beauty, you might someday see past my ugliness," Adrian said simply, and the raw honesty in his words stole her breath. "I hoped that if I showed patience, you might grant me understanding. I hoped that if I respected your boundaries, you might eventually choose to cross them yourself." He stood abruptly, as if embarrassed by his own vulnerability, and moved to the window that overlooked the dark Yorkshire moors. "I'm not good at this, at talking about feelings or emotions. I'm a soldier. I understand orders and duty and sacrifice. But I don't understand how to court my own wife, how to make her smile instead of flinch, how to be something other than the monster everyone expects." Rosalind found herself rising and moving toward him, drawn by the pain in his voice. She stopped a few feet away, close enough to see the tension in his shoulders, the white knuckles of his gloved hands gripping the window frame. "Then perhaps," she said slowly, testing the words on her tongue, "you should start by telling me the truth. Not the legend of the Iron Duke, not the war hero everyone fears, but the real man. The one who has nightmares and hides his hands and surrounds me with roses as if flowers could erase the fact that I didn't choose this." Adrian turned to face her, and in the firelight she could see unshed tears glittering in his stormy gray eyes. "The truth? The truth is that I am broken, Lady Rosalind. Irreparably broken by 15 years of killing and dying and making choices that damn my soul. The truth is that I hide my hands because they're covered in scars from wounds that should have killed me but didn't, because death himself seems to have no use for a man like me. The truth is that every night I dream of the men I've killed, and every morning I wake up wondering if today is the day I finally become the monster they all think I am." His voice cracked on the last words, and he turned away as if ashamed of his own emotion. "And the truth is that the only thing in this entire godforsaken world that gives me any hope at all is the idea that maybe, just maybe, I could protect something beautiful instead of destroying it. That maybe I could earn the right to stand beside you instead of above you. That maybe, if I try hard enough, you might someday look at me and see a man instead of a nightmare." The silence that followed was deafening. Rosalind stood frozen, her anger and fear warring with an unwelcome compassion for this tortured soul who had claimed her as his own salvation. She had expected a brute, a tyrant, a man who would take what he wanted without remorse. But this vulnerable, haunted confession from a man who could barely admit to his own humanity was something entirely different. entirely unexpected, and dangerous, because it was so much harder to hate a man when you understood his pain. "I won't pretend to forgive you for taking my choices away," Rosalind finally said, her voice steady despite her churning emotions. "I won't pretend that this marriage is what I wanted or that I can simply forget how it came to be. But perhaps, double quotes, she took a deep breath, making a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable. Perhaps I can try to understand you. Perhaps we can find a way to coexist that doesn't involve me hiding in my rooms and you walking these halls like a ghost. But you must promise me something in return." Adrian turned back to her so quickly she could see desperate hope written across his face. "Anything. Name it, and it's yours." "No more secrets," Rosalind said firmly. "If we're to have any chance at making this bearable, you must be honest with me. About your past, about why you really made that bargain with my father, about what you want from this marriage beyond some vague notion of redemption. I need to know who you are, Duke Blackwood. Not the legend, the man." "Adrian," he corrected softly, taking a tentative step toward her. "My name is Adrian. And if we're to have truth between us, then I need you to use it. I need to hear my name from your lips without fear or formality. Can you do that, Rosalind?" It was the first time he had used her name without her title, and the intimacy of it sent a shiver down her spine. "Adrian," she tested the name, and watched something in his expression soften at the sound. "Very well, Adrian. Tomorrow you will tell me your story, all of it, the good, the terrible, the parts that give you nightmares, and I will listen. I make no promises beyond that, but I will listen. Perhaps that's a place to start." "Tomorrow," Adrian agreed, and for the first time since she had met him, he smiled. It was a small, hesitant thing, rusty with disuse, but it transformed his entire face. For just a moment she glimpsed the young man he must have been before war stole his humanity, and her breath caught at the beauty of it. "Thank you, Rosalind. You have given me more tonight than I deserved or dared to hope for. I will not waste this chance." He offered her his arm, a gentleman's gesture that held no threat, only courtesy. "May I escort you back to your rooms? The castle can be confusing in the dark, and I would not want you to lose your way." Rosalind hesitated only a moment before placing her hand lightly on his arm, feeling the solid strength of him even through layers of fabric. They walked through the shadowed halls of Blackwood Castle in silence, but it was no longer the tense, angry silence of before. It was something softer, more contemplative. At her door, Adrian released her arm and stepped back, giving her space, always giving her space. "Good night, Rosalind. Sleep well, and know that you are safe here. Always safe." As Rosalind prepared for bed that night, she found herself thinking not of Edward's easy charm or her lost future, but of gray eyes filled with pain and hope, of a voice that broke when admitting to brokenness, of a man who killed enemies on battlefields but surrounded her with roses. She didn't love him. She still resented him. But perhaps, just perhaps, Margaret was right. Perhaps the prison she lived in was partly of her own making, and perhaps the monster she had married was far more human than she wanted to admit. As she drifted to sleep, she wondered what tomorrow's truths would reveal, and whether understanding the Iron Duke would be her salvation or her doom. Because the most dangerous thing in the world wasn't a monster. It was a monster who made you want to save him. The Yorkshire morning broke gray and cold, mist rolling across the moors like ghostly armies, and Rosalind woke to find a note slipped under her door. Adrian's handwriting was sharp and precise, military in its efficiency, but the words themselves held a vulnerability that made her chest ache. "I will be in the library after breakfast. Come when you're ready. There's no rush. I've waited 12 years for this chance. I can wait a few more hours." She took her time dressing, choosing a day gown of soft blue that reminded her of clearer skies, and braided her auburn hair in a simple style. When she finally made her way to the library, she paused outside the heavy oak doors, gathering courage. This was it. The moment she would learn who Adrian Blackwood truly was beneath the armor he showed the world. Part of her wanted to flee back to her rooms, to preserve her anger and resentment, because they were safe emotions, familiar emotions. But curiosity and something deeper, something she didn't want to name, pushed her forward. The library was massive, 2 stories of floor-to-ceiling books with a spiral iron staircase leading to the upper level. Morning light filtered through tall windows, illuminating dancing dust motes and casting everything in shades of amber. Adrian stood by the fireplace, dressed more casually than she had ever seen him, in dark trousers and a simple white shirt without his usual formal coat. And most striking of all, he wore no gloves. His hands, finally revealed, were a roadmap of violence survived. Scars crisscrossed his palms and fingers, some thin and surgical, others thick and brutal. One scar wrapped completely around his right wrist like a shackle. Another ran from his left thumb almost to his elbow. These were the hands he had hidden from her, the hands that told stories of pain and survival. "You came," he said softly, following her gaze to his exposed hands. "I thought perhaps you would change your mind. Decide that some truths are better left unknown." He held up his scarred hands, offering them for her inspection without shame or attempt to hide. "This is what war does, Rosalind. It marks you inside and out. Every scar here represents a moment I should have died but didn't. Every one is a reminder that I survived when better men fell." Rosalind moved closer, drawn by morbid fascination and unexpected compassion. "May I?" she asked quietly, gesturing to his hands. When he nodded, she took them in her own smaller ones, tracing the pattern of scars with gentle fingers. His hands trembled at her touch, and she realized this simple intimacy was perhaps more vulnerable than anything they had shared yet. "Tell me about them. Tell me about the war, about what made you the man everyone fears." Adrian's gray eyes closed briefly, as if steeling himself for pain, then he guided her to the leather sofa before the fire. They sat, not touching, but close enough that she could feel his warmth, and he began to speak. "I was 20 when I bought my commission and headed to the peninsula. Young, arrogant, convinced I would cover myself in glory and return home a hero. I lasted exactly 3 weeks before my first real battle." His voice was distant, as if he were looking at events through a telescope of years. "Bothahoff. Do you know that name?" "No, of course not. Why would a gentlewoman like you know the names of battles? But men who were there we can never forget. The siege lasted weeks. We finally breached the walls, and what followed, ... He stopped, his jaw clenching. What followed was hell. Men went mad with bloodlust, looting, killing, doing things that haunt me still. I tried to stop them, tried to maintain order, but I was just one man. And in the chaos I took a bayonet to the side." He touched his ribs, and Rosalind realized that beneath his shirt were probably more scars she hadn't seen. "I should have died that night. Would have died. Except the surgeon was a man named Thomas Ashford, serving as a field medic because he wanted to do his patriotic duty. Your father saved my life on a blood-soaked table in a collapsing building while the city burned around us. I was delirious with fever for weeks, and he stayed with me, talked to me, told me about his family back home. He showed me a miniature portrait of his wife and his 2 little girls. That portrait became my talisman. I would stare at those painted faces and try to remember that somewhere in the world, innocent people still existed, untouched by the horror I was living." Adrian stood and walked to the window, staring out at the moors as if he could see the past written on the landscape. I rose through the ranks quickly, not because I was brave, but because I was willing to make the hard choices other officers couldn't stomach. Send men to certain death to save the regiment. Burn villages that harbored enemies. Execute deserters. Pour encourager les autres. I became the Iron Duke because iron doesn't bend, doesn't break, doesn't feel. And I needed not to feel, Rosalind, because if I had allowed myself to feel, I would have eaten my pistol within the first year." Rosalind felt tears sliding down her cheeks, overwhelmed by the weight of his confession. "But you did feel," she whispered. "That's why the nightmares. That's why you hide your emotions. Not because you're iron, but because you're too human to bear what you've done." "Yes," the word was barely audible. "I met your father again 12 years ago, before the push into France. We were planning an assault on an enemy stronghold, and the building we were using as headquarters was rigged to explode. Your father noticed something was wrong, shouted a warning, but there wasn't time for everyone to escape. The explosion took out half the structure. I found him trapped under a collapsed wall, bleeding from a dozen wounds, dying. I should have left him, should have prioritized the mission, but I couldn't. I dug through stone and timber with my bare hands until they were shredded, pulled him free and carried him 2 miles to the field hospital while enemy snipers took shots at us." He turned back to her, and his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "That's where these scars came from." He held up his ruined hands. "And when he woke, when he realized I had saved him at great personal risk, he said he owed me a life debt. Asked what I wanted, and all I could think of was that portrait of innocent faces untouched by war. I wanted something pure, something beautiful, something that represented everything I was fighting for. I asked for the most precious thing he had. He promised me you. So I'm not just a wife," Rosalind said slowly, understanding dawning. "I'm a symbol, representation of everything you lost in the war. Innocence, beauty, hope. That's an impossible burden, Adrian. I'm not a saint or an angel. I'm just a woman who wanted to choose her own path, and you've turned me into some kind of idealized redemption that I can never live up to." "You're right," Adrian admitted, moving back to sit beside her. This time he did reach for her hand, his scarred fingers tangling with her smooth ones. When I claimed you, I didn't think about the real woman you had become. I thought only of my own desperate need for something good in my life. But Rosalind, these past weeks, watching you from afar, seeing your strength and spirit and refusal to submit even when you were afraid, I've begun to see you. Not the symbol, but the woman. And the woman is far more extraordinary than any fantasy I created. Then tell me, Rosalind demanded, squeezing his hand. What do you want from this marriage now? Now that you know I'm not some perfect angel who can erase your sins. What do you actually want from me? Adrian was silent for a long moment, his thumb tracing circles on her palm, a gesture that sent unexpected heat through her body. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw with honesty. I want to know you. Really know you. What makes you laugh, what makes you cry, what you dream about when you're alone at night. I want to earn the right to touch you without seeing fear in your eyes. I want to fall asleep beside you and wake without nightmares because your presence reminds me that beauty still exists. I want to give you the choice I stole and hope that someday, maybe years from now, you might choose me not because you're forced to, but because you want to. He raised their joined hands and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, a gesture of courtly devotion that contrasted sharply with his warrior's reputation. I want to deserve you, Rosalind, even if I never achieve it. I want to spend the rest of my life trying. Rosalind felt her carefully constructed walls crumbling in the face of his vulnerability. This wasn't the tyrant she had expected to hate. This was a damaged, desperate man who had made terrible choices out of profound loneliness and pain. She couldn't forgive him yet, couldn't simply forget how this marriage came to be. But she could see him now, really see him, and what she saw wasn't a monster. It was a man who had survived hell and was trying, however clumsily, to find his way back to humanity through her. I can't promise to love you, she said honestly, watching pain flash across his face but needing him to understand. I can't promise that I'll ever stop resenting how this marriage began. But I can promise to try. To know you as you want to know me, to give you chances to prove that you're more than your reputation, to stop hiding in my rooms and actually share a life with you, even if it's not the life I would have chosen. Can that be enough? For now? It's more than I have any right to ask, Adrian breathed, and the relief and hope in his expression were devastating in their intensity. Thank you. Thank you for giving me a chance I don't deserve. He stood, pulling her gently to her feet. And for a moment they stood close enough that she could feel his heartbeat, could see the silver flecks in his gray eyes, could smell leather and something darker, something that was purely him. Let me show you, Blackwood, really show you. Not as your prison, but as your home. Let me introduce you to the tenants who will be your responsibility, show you the estate you'll manage beside me. Let me prove that you're not just my captive, but my partner. Over the following days, something shifted in Blackwood Castle. Rosalind emerged from her rooms not as a prisoner, but as the Duchess she had become. Adrian was true to his word, introducing her to every tenant and servant, deferring to her judgment on household matters, making it clear that she had real authority and purpose. They began taking meals together, at first in tense silence, but gradually conversation flowed more easily. She discovered he had a dry, subtle wit beneath his military bearing. He learned that she could match him in debates about politics and philosophy, that her gentle exterior hid a fierce intelligence. But more than their conversations, it was the small moments that began to change everything. The way Adrian's face softened whenever she entered a room, as if she were sunlight-piercing storm clouds. The way he listened with complete attention whenever she spoke, as if her words were divine revelation. The way he maintained careful distance unless she initiated contact, always giving her control, always respecting her boundaries. And the nightmares. On the third night, Rosalind woke to sounds of distress coming from Adrian's adjoining chambers. She stood at the connecting door for a long time, her hand on the key he had given her, listening to his anguished cries, his pleas for forgiveness to men long dead. Finally, unable to bear his suffering, she unlocked the door. Adrian's chambers were darker than hers, masculine and sparse, and he thrashed in his massive bed, tangled in sheets, his face contorted in terror. No, don't fire. They're surrendering, God, no. Not the children. His words broke off in a sob, and Rosalind moved without thinking. Sitting on the edge of his bed and touching his shoulder gently. Adrian, wake up. It's just a dream. You're safe. You're home. Her voice seemed to reach him even in sleep, and his eyes flew open, wild and disoriented. For a moment he didn't recognize her, and she saw the warrior he must have been, dangerous and lethal. Then awareness returned, and with it devastation. Rosalind? God, I'm sorry, did I wake you? You shouldn't see me like this. You should go. He tried to turn away, ashamed, but she caught his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. No more hiding, she said firmly, echoing his own words back to him. You told me you wanted truth between us. This is truth. You have nightmares. You're haunted by your past. And instead of facing them alone, let me help you. She didn't know where the words came from, didn't understand the compassion flooding her chest, but she couldn't leave him to drown in his demons. Not when she finally understood they were real. Not when she could see the toll they took. I don't know how to let anyone help, Adrian whispered, but he didn't pull away from her touch. I've been alone in my head for so long, I don't know how to share this burden. Then learn, Rosalind said softly. Teach me about your nightmares and I'll teach you about my fears. We'll face our demons together instead of in isolation. That's what partners do, isn't it? Even partners who didn't choose each other. She offered him a small smile and watched wonder bloom across his features. Partners. He repeated the word as if testing its weight. I like that. Not captor and captive, not even husband and wife. Partners. His hand came up to cover hers where it rested on his cheek, and the gentleness of that gesture, from a man who could kill without mercy, broke something open inside her chest. They talked until dawn. Rosalind curled beside him on the bed with carefully maintained space between them, listening as he exorcised demons through confession. He told her about the boy soldiers who looked like children, about the villages they couldn't save, about the choices that haunted him, and she told him about her fears, about feeling powerless, about mourning the future she had lost. Somewhere in those dark hours, something fundamental shifted. They were no longer stranger enemies bound by law. They were two wounded souls trying to heal each other. As weak sunlight finally crept through the windows, Adrian's eyes began to close with exhaustion, but he fought it, afraid to sleep and dream again. Rosalind made a decision that surprised even herself. Sleep, she commanded gently. I'll stay. If the nightmares come, I'll wake you. And because trust had to start somewhere, because this broken man needed to know he wasn't alone, she lay down beside him, still maintaining proper distance, but present, offering silent companionship. Adrian's eyes filled with tears he was too exhausted to hide. You don't have to do this. You owe me nothing. I know, Rosalind said simply. Psst, I'm not doing this because I owe you. I'm doing this because, despite everything, I think you might be worth saving. And because maybe, in saving you, I might save myself too. She reached out and took his scarred hand in hers, holding on like an anchor. Now sleep, Adrian. I promise you're safe. He slept then, truly slept, for the first time in weeks. And Rosalind lay beside him, watching the hard lines of his face soften and rest, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing, and realizing with equal parts terror and wonder that something was growing between them. Not love, not yet, but something that might, with time and care, become something real, something chosen despite its forced beginning. And as she finally drifted to sleep herself, still holding his hand, she felt the first stirrings of peace in her own heart. Perhaps this prison could become a home. Perhaps this monster could become a man. Perhaps this forced marriage could become something neither of them expected but both desperately needed. Redemption wrapped in second chances, healing found in the most unlikely of places. The weeks that followed brought a transformation to Blackwood Castle that astonished everyone who witnessed it. The fortress that had stood cold and austere for decades began to warm under Rosalind's influence. And the Duke, who had never smiled, now wore an expression of cautious joy whenever his Duchess was near. They developed a routine, these unlikely partners learning the contours of each other's souls through shared mornings in the library, afternoon rides across the moors, and quiet evenings by the fire. Adrian taught Rosalind about estate management, genuinely valuing her input, while she introduced music and laughter to halls that had known only military precision. And every night since that first nightmare, Rosalind slept in Adrian's chambers, maintaining a careful distance in his massive bed, but offering the comfort of her presence against the demons that stalked his sleep. But happiness, Rosalind was learning, was a fragile thing, easily shattered by the ghosts of the past. It happened on a gray afternoon 3 weeks into their tentative peace. A messenger arrived from London bearing news that drained all color from Adrian's face. 3 of his former soldiers, men he had commanded during the worst campaigns, had been found dead under mysterious circumstances. All 3 showed signs of execution-style killings, and all 3 had been involved in a controversial incident during the war that Adrian had buried in classified reports. Someone was systematically eliminating witnesses to something that had happened years ago, something Adrian had hoped would stay dead and forgotten. Rosalind found him in his study, standing rigid before the fire, the letter crumpled in his fist. She knew immediately that something was terribly wrong. The walls he had slowly lowered over the past weeks slammed back into place, and the Iron Duke stared out at her from eyes gone cold and distant. "You need to leave," he said without preamble, his voice stripped of all emotion. "Pack your things. I'm sending you to Ashford Manor tonight. You'll stay there until I send word it's safe to return." "What?" "No, Adrian, what's happened? Talk to me." Rosalind moved to his side, trying to take his arm, but he jerked away as if her touch burned. The rejection stung, sharp and unexpected, reminding her of those first terrible days when he had been nothing but an intimidating stranger. "This doesn't concern you." Adrian's words were clipped, military, every syllable a wall between them. "There are men coming for me, men with debts to settle from the war. I won't have you caught in the crossfire of my past mistakes. You will go to Ashford Manor tonight, and you will stay there until I deal with this threat. That is not a request, Duchess. It's an order." Anger flooded Rosalind's chest, hot and fierce. After weeks of building trust, of becoming partners, he was dismissing her like a child who couldn't handle difficult truths. "An order? How dare you? I am not one of your soldiers to be commanded and sent away when things become dangerous. I am your wife, your partner as you called me. You swore no more secrets between us. You promised. I'm protecting you." Adrian's control finally cracked, and he spun to face her with such ferocity that she took an involuntary step back. "Men are dying, Rosalind. Men I served with, men who know secrets that could destroy everything. And whoever is killing them will eventually come here, will eventually discover that the easiest way to hurt me is through you. I cannot, will not, allow you to be used as leverage against me. I won't survive watching you harmed because of my past. So you will go, now, tonight, and you will stay away until I've eliminated this threat. Or you could trust me," Rosalind shot back, refusing to be cowed by his anger. "You could tell me what happened, let me help you face this instead of facing it alone. Isn't that what we've been building these past weeks, a partnership? Or was all of it a lie? The vulnerability, the trust, the connection, was it all just pretense to make your captive wife more compliant?" The pain that flashed across Adrian's face was so profound that Rosalind immediately regretted her words. But before she could take them back, he moved closer, looming over her with all the intimidating power of his reputation. "You want the truth? Fine. During the war, we received intelligence that a French partisan cell was hiding in a village, planning an ambush that would have killed hundreds of our men. I was ordered to neutralize the threat. When we arrived, the partisans used civilians as shields, children as human barriers. I had a choice. Let the ambush happen and watch my men die, or give the order to fire and risk civilian casualties. One chose my men. 17 civilians died that day, including 5 children. The official report called it regrettable collateral damage. The unofficial truth is that I ordered men to fire on a crowd that included innocents, and I've lived with that choice every day since." The silence that followed was suffocating. Rosalind stared at the man before her, seeing him stripped bare of all pretense, revealing the sin that haunted him more than any battlefield death. "Adrian ... double quotes, she breathed his name, but words failed her. "Now you know," Adrian continued, his voice hollow. "Now you understand the monster you've been sleeping beside. Those 3 dead soldiers were there that day. They know what really happened, and someone wants to ensure that truth dies with them. Someone who will eventually realize that I am the primary target and that you are my weakness. So yes, I'm sending you away because I cannot protect you and hunt these killers simultaneously, and because I cannot, will not allow anyone to harm you because of my sins. You deserve better than to be collateral damage in a war that should have ended years ago." Rosalind felt her world tilting as she processed this revelation. This was the choice that had broken him, the nightmare that woke him screaming. Not the killing of soldiers in battle, but the death of innocents he couldn't save. And he was right. It was terrible, unforgivable even. But as she looked into his gray eyes, she saw not a monster glorying in violence, but a man destroyed by an impossible choice, punished every day by his own conscience. "You did what you thought was right," she said slowly, testing her own feelings as she spoke. "You made a choice with no good options, a choice that has haunted you ever since. That doesn't make you a monster, Adrian. It makes you human." "Human?" Adrian laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "Humans don't order the deaths of children. Humans don't sacrifice innocents to save their own. I am exactly what everyone thinks I am, Rosalind. A killer. And the only thing I've ever done right is keeping you safe, keeping you separate from the violence that defines me. Don't romanticize my sins or excuse my choices. Just go, please." The last word came out as a plea, and she saw his hands were shaking, saw the tears he was fighting to contain. "No," Rosalind said firmly and watched shock bloom across his features. No, I won't go. I won't abandon you to face this alone. You say I'm your weakness? Then let me be your strength. You taught me that partners face things together, so tell me everything. Tell me who's hunting you, what they want, how we can stop them, and then we'll decide together what to do. Not you ordering me away like a possession to be locked up for safekeeping, but us making a choice as equals. That's what you promised me, Adrian. That's what I'm holding you to. You stubborn, impossible woman, Adrian breathed. But there was something like awe in his voice. Don't you understand? If something happened to you because of me, it would destroy what little humanity I have left. You're the only good thing in my life. The only thing that makes me believe I might be something more than the monster the war created. Losing you would be losing my last chance at redemption. Then don't lose me by pushing me away. Rosalind closed the distance between them, placing her hands on his chest, feeling his heart racing beneath her palms. Lose me by trusting me. Lose me by letting me stand beside you instead of behind you. You're so afraid of making me collateral damage that you're about to make me a casualty of your fear instead. She looked up at him, and this time she was the one offering vulnerability, laying her heart bare. These past weeks I've watched you transform from the nightmare I feared into a man I respect. A man I'm beginning to care for, despite every reason not to. Don't throw that away because you're scared. Be brave enough to let me in completely. Not just the parts you think I can handle. Adrian's resolve was crumbling. She could see it in his eyes and the way his hands came up to frame her face with aching gentleness. I'm so afraid, he whispered, the confession of the man who feared nothing finally admitting to terror. I'm afraid of losing you. Afraid of failing to protect you. Afraid that my past will destroy the fragile future we're building. I don't know how to do this, how to love someone enough to let them share my burdens instead of sheltering them from pain. Love? Rosalind caught the word, held it between them like something precious and terrifying. Adrian, did you just say love? He froze, realizing what he had admitted, and she watched panic and hope war across his features. Yes. God help me, yes. I love you, Rosalind. I think I've been falling in love with you since that first night you slept beside me, chasing away nightmares just by being there. I love your strength, your compassion, your refusal to be cowed by anyone, including me. I love the way you've brought warmth to this cold castle, the way you've made me believe I might deserve a second chance. And I'm terrified that love will be what destroys you, because everyone I've ever cared about has been taken from me or harmed by their association with me. Rosalind felt tears streaming down her face, overwhelmed by the raw honesty of his confession. She didn't know if what she felt was love yet. Couldn't name the emotion that swelled in her chest when he looked at her like she was his entire world. But she knew it was real, knew it mattered, knew that this complicated, damaged man had somehow claimed a piece of her heart when she wasn't looking. Then let me love you back, she said through her tears. Let me be strong enough to stand in the storm beside you instead of hiding from it. Tell me everything, Adrian. Trust me completely. And let me prove that I'm not going to shatter at the first sign of danger. Adrian's control finally broke completely. He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, his face buried in her hair as his body shook with silent sobs. I can't lose you, he repeated over and over like a prayer. I can't lose you. And Rosalind held him back just as fiercely. This warrior who had finally found the courage to be vulnerable. This monster who turned out to be achingly human after all. They stood like that until Adrian's shaking subsided, until he could breathe steadily again. Then, still holding her hand as if afraid she might disappear, he told her everything. The partisan incident, the 3 dead soldiers, the classified reports that proved his controversial decision. The enemies he had made, both French sympathizers who wanted revenge and English officers who thought his methods too brutal. The intelligence suggesting that someone with significant resources was systematically eliminating everyone connected to that day, working their way toward him, and his fear that Rosalind, as his wife, as the first person he had allowed himself to care about in 15 years, was now a target. So what do we do? Rosalind asked when he finished, her mind already working through possibilities. Because I meant what I said. I'm not leaving you to face this alone. We're partners, Adrian. For better or worse, that's what we chose to become. Adrian studied her for a long moment, and she saw the exact instant he made his decision, the moment he chose to truly trust her instead of protecting her through distance. Then we fight, he said simply. Together. I have men I trust, soldiers who served with me and know the truth. I'll send for them, bring them here to fortify Blackwood. We'll set a trap for whoever's coming. Use me as bait, but with you safely hidden where you can escape if things go wrong. You won't be on the front lines, but you won't be sent away either. And Rosalind, he cupped her face tenderly, his scarred thumbs wiping away her tears. If something happens to me, if this goes badly, I need you to promise you'll run. Don't try to save me. Don't sacrifice yourself for a man who's already lived too long with too much blood on his hands. Promise me. Only if you promise something in return, Rosalind countered. Promise me that you'll fight to survive, not because you think you deserve to die for your sins. Promise me you'll come back to me because I'm not done knowing you yet. I'm not done building a life with you. Promise me this isn't the end of our story, Adrian, but the beginning of our real partnership. The one where we both choose each other, not because we're forced to, but because we want to. I promise, Adrian whispered, then did something he had never done before. He kissed her. Not the brief, formal kiss at their wedding, but a real kiss, deep and desperate and full of everything he felt and couldn't say. Rosalind melted into him, her hands tangling in his dark hair, kissing him back with equal intensity. It was a kiss that tasted of tears and fear and hope, a declaration that they were in this together, whatever came next. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. I don't deserve you, he murmured, but I'm going to spend the rest of my life starting by trusting you to be my true partner in this fight. Over the next 3 days, Blackwood Castle became an armed fortress. 6 of Adrian's most trusted men arrived, veterans who knew his methods and owed him their lives. Rosalind proved herself not a delicate flower but a capable partner, helping to coordinate defenses, managing supplies, and keeping morale high among the household staff who were terrified but determined. She and Adrian worked side by side, their trust deepening with every decision made together, every crisis navigated as a team. And at night they no longer maintained careful distance in his bed. Rosalind curled into his arms, her presence the only thing that kept his nightmares at bay, while he held her like something precious, whispering promises into her hair about the future they would build if they survived this threat. The attack came on the 4th night, just after midnight. Armed men breached the outer walls with military precision, clearly professional soldiers rather than common criminals. Adrian had anticipated this, had positioned his men strategically, and the battle that erupted in the castle grounds was brutal and efficient. Rosalind watched from her hiding place in the Duchess's chambers, a loaded pistol in her shaking hands, listening to gunfire and shouting, praying desperately that Adrian would survive this night. The fighting lasted less than an hour, but it felt like an eternity. Finally, blessed silence fell. Rosalind waited, hardly breathing, until she heard Adrian's voice calling for her. She flew from her hiding place, racing through the corridors until she found him in the great hall. He was bleeding from a wound on his arm, his shirt torn and face bruised, but alive, so beautifully, wonderfully alive. She launched herself at him, and he caught her despite his injury, holding her tight while she sobbed against his chest. It's over, he murmured into her hair. We captured their leader. It was one of my former commanding officers, a man who wanted the partisan incident exposed to destroy my reputation and claim credit for my military victories. He's been taken into custody. The threat is gone. You're safe. We're safe. I was so afraid. Rosalind pulled back just enough to see his face, her hands checking him frantically for injuries. I thought I might lose you before I had the chance to tell you. Tell me what? Adrian asked gently, cupping her face in his scarred, bloodied hands. That I love you, Rosalind said clearly, needing him to hear it, needing to say it while he was alive and present in hers. I didn't want to. I fought against it. But somewhere between the nightmares and the roses, between your vulnerability and your strength, I fell in love with you. Not the legend, not the Iron Duke, but the real man. The one who's terrified of losing me. The one who makes impossible choices and lives with the consequences. The one who's trying so hard to be worthy of a redemption he doesn't think he deserves. I love you, Adrian Blackwood, and I choose you. Not because I'm forced to, but because I want to. Because you're mine, as much as I'm yours. Adrian's gray eyes filled with tears that finally fell, and his smile was blinding despite his exhaustion and pain. Say it again, he whispered. Please. I need to hear it again, need to know this is real. I love you, Rosalind repeated, laughing through her own tears. I love you, I love you, I love you. And she kissed him between each declaration, tasting blood and salt and joy, feeling his arms around her like the safest place in the world. In the weeks that followed, as they healed from physical and emotional wounds, Rosalind and Adrian built the marriage they both should have had from the beginning. One based not on force or duty, but on mutual respect, trust, and a love that had grown in the unlikeliest of soil. They renewed their vows in the same chapel where they had first wed. But this time Rosalind walked down the aisle not as a captive, but as a woman making a choice. This time, when Adrian slipped the ring on her finger, his hands were steady. This time, when they kissed, it was not brief and formal, but deep and full of promise. Blackwood Castle, once cold and forbidding, bloomed under their combined care. The gardens Rosalind planted flourished, roses climbing the dark stone walls in defiance of the gloomy weather. The halls rang with music and laughter as Rosalind convinced Adrian to host gatherings, to open his home and heart to the possibility of friendship and community. And Adrian, the man who had feared nothing on any battlefield, learned the greatest courage of all, the courage to be vulnerable, to trust, to allow himself to be loved despite his scars and sins. On a spring morning 1 year after their wedding, Rosalind woke in Adrian's arms, sunlight streaming through the windows and painting everything in gold. She studied his face in sleep, this complicated, beautiful man who had transformed from her nightmare into her salvation. His nightmares had lessened, though they never fully disappeared. Some wounds ran too deep to heal completely. But now when they came, she was there to wake him gently, to remind him that he was safe, that he was loved, that his past did not define his future. As if sensing her gaze, Adrian's eyes opened, and his immediate smile was something that never failed to take her breath away. "Good morning, my love," he murmured, pulling her closer. What are you thinking about?" "I'm thinking about how I almost missed this," Rosalind admitted, tracing the scar on his jaw with tender fingers. "How I was so focused on what I had lost that I nearly refused to see what I might gain. How the man I thought was my enemy became my greatest love." She paused, then added with a mischievous smile, "And I'm thinking that I have news that might either terrify you or make you the happiest man in England." Adrian sat up instantly, all attention focused on her with an intensity that still made her pulse race. "Tell me, I'm pregnant," Rosalind said softly, watching 1,000 emotions flicker across his face. "We're going to have a child, Adrian. A new beginning for both of us." For a moment, Adrian couldn't speak. Then he gathered her into his arms with such gentle reverence that tears sprang to her eyes. "A child," he breathed against her hair. "Our child. God, Rosalind, I don't know if I deserve this happiness, but I swear to you, I will spend every day being worthy of it. Being worthy of you, of our family. I will be the father I never had, the husband you always deserved. I will build a life where our children know only love, never fear, where they see their father as a protector, not a monster. They will see you as I do," Rosalind promised, "as a hero. Not because you never made mistakes, but because you had the courage to keep trying, to keep growing, to let yourself be redeemed through love. You're the bravest man I know, Adrian, because you've faced your demons and won, and our children will be so lucky to have you as their father." They sat together in the morning light, planning a future they had both nearly lost, two people who had found their way to love through the darkest of beginnings. Outside, roses climbed the stone walls of Blackwood Castle, beauty growing from cold stone, life flourishing where once there had been only shadows. And inside, the Iron Duke, who had feared nothing except losing the woman he loved, held that woman close, finally at peace with himself, finally believing he might deserve the redemption he had been granted. The war was over. Not just the one against Napoleon, but the war within Adrian's soul. He had come home not just to England, but to himself. And he had found in the most unexpected way that the thing promised to him 12 years ago had given him far more than he ever imagined. Not just a wife, not just a companion, but a partner who saw his darkness and chose to bring light. A woman who taught him that the bravest thing a warrior can do is not charge into battle, but surrender his heart to love. And Rosalind, who had once cursed the fate that bound her to a stranger, now blessed every day that she had found the courage to look beyond fear and see the extraordinary man hidden behind the iron facade. She had learned that sometimes the greatest prisons are the ones we build around our own hearts, and that freedom comes not from escaping our circumstances, but from choosing how we respond to them. They had both been prisoners, she of duty and he of the past, and they had both found freedom in the last place they expected, in each other's arms. In a love neither forced nor fated, but chosen daily, renewed with every sunrise, strengthened by every challenge they faced together. The Duke, who feared nothing except losing her, learned that the only way to keep her was to set her free to choose him. And the woman who swore never to love him discovered that the deepest love often grows in the darkest soil, that redemption is possible for even the most broken souls, and that sometimes the life we don't choose turns out to be the one we needed all along. If you enjoyed the story, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapters. Leave a like to support our work. Share in the comments what you would do if you were in the character's place. Your opinion might appear in the next video.